Curious Lloyd.
There are some illnesses that have plagued humanity since time immemorial, including diseases such as smallpox, Spanish flu, Black Death, malaria, cholera, and typhus. However, some of the most truly horrible and bizarre diseases reared their heads for one specific moment in history before vanishing just as strangely as they arrived, never to be seen again. So sit tight as I reveal some of the most bizarre diseases humanity has ever seen. Your teeth might have exploded in the 19th century. In the 1800s, medical journals started recording instances of people's teeth spontaneously exploding. The first recorded case occurred in 1817 with a reverend who, after days of suffering and untold agony from toothache, he experienced all at once a sharp crack, like a pistol shot, bursting his tooth to fragments, which gave him an instant relief. At this moment, he turned to his wife and said, "My pain is all gone." He went to bed and slept soundly all that day and most of the succeeding night, after which he was rational and well. This was the template for every case of exploding tooth syndrome. Victims would suffer from a tremendous toothache, followed by their mouth detonating from the inside out like baby aliens were inside. In 1830, a Mrs. Letita D. reported an aching tooth terminating by bursting with report, while a dentist in 1871 reported an occurrence of ETS so violent that the patient was knocked on the floor and deafened. Several cases later, however, and the condition vanished, never to be seen again. According to a group of researchers, it's likely that ETS was caused by a reaction between hydrogen gas and the metals used in old-time fillings. In those days, fillings were often made from any combination of lead, tin, and silver, and it's possible that these could have created a low-voltage electrochemical cell that would create a battery. The hydrogen, meanwhile, could have been created by any part of the tooth cavity that was accidentally left over from the often poor dental surgery of the time. If the filling created an electrical charge in the presence of hydrogen, a miniature explosion could have occurred any time. Chlorosis exhausted women and turned them green in the 18th century. Doctors have a pretty bad track record as far as being able to correctly identify and treat any ailment specific to women. For example, 18th century physicians found themselves baffled by a new malady called chlorosis, which messed up with the menstrual cycle and left women withered and haggard and turned them green. You can imagine why men were confused. For over 200 years, chlorosis ravaged the young women of the high society. Within days of contracting it, they'd be unable to stand or stay awake. They'd also suffer from swollen joints, heart palpitations. Also, their periods would stop, and according to reports of the time, their skin green. But oddly, it was a classiest disease. It only hit women of the upper class, and rarely, if ever, affected members of the working class. True to the medical science of the time, doctors blamed the disease on their patients not getting enough sex. This became the leading diagnosis after doctors noticed that chlorosis stopped menstruation. Now you see, menstrual blood was considered the female equivalent of semen. It stood to reason that the blockage was caused by chastity, hence chlorosis was nicknamed the virgin's disease. The real cause turned out to be a form of anemia, caused by their terrible diets, a malady that was quickly remedied by regular iron supplements. Interestingly, this was suggested at the start of the outbreak, but it took 2 centuries for someone to give the idea a serious approach. Phossy Jaw destroyed faces in the 1800s. Working in an Industrial Revolution era factory was many things if you weren't being scalped by machinery or scavenging in the sewers for valuable trash. Or you were in a matchstick factory suffering from Phossy Jaw, a whimsically named condition wherein your jaw spent most of its time trying to grow itself off your face. But did you notice that I said matchstick factory, not face-melting chemical plant? Now you see, back in those days, matches were made by dipping pieces of wood into a chemical called white phosphorus. Although the white phosphorus allowed the matches of the time to burn more strongly than their predecessors, the dipping vats produced insane levels of toxic fumes. The workers who dipped the matches began suffering from chronic toothache, followed by their jaws exploding into discharge spewing abscesses-covered masses of glowing bone. If the diagnosis wasn't terminal, the patient would be forced to have their jaw amputated in order to save their life. At this moment, your body is releasing chemicals that break down unhealthy bone and replace it with new bone. In healthy people, it's a seamless process. In people who spend their days breathing in phosphorus, however, The chemical disrupts the body's ability to break down the unhealthy bone. As a result, the body keeps piling new jawbone on top of infected jawbone, and it won't stop. I'd like to say when this condition first emerged, factories stopped using white phosphorus and switched over to the safer, costlier red phosphorus. And I could say that if I felt like building a house of lies. Now you see, while Phossy Jaw was first identified in 1858, it wasn't until 1906 that a ban on white phosphorus made matches was finally instated. That's nearly 50 years of people's jaws mutating for a specific, and nobody did anything about it for a fear of offending an important industry at the time. The plague of Athens was so bad that the Spartans refused to invade. I've got a historical perspective for you. Zika is a virological nothingness compared to the plague of Athens, a raging pestilence that devastated the city-state during the early years of the Olympic Games, turning everyone it encountered into messy puddles of blood, sweat, and feces. It's only thanks to one historian called Thucydides that we know how the disease operated. In its early stage, victims suffered from violent heats in the head and redness and inflammation in the eyes, followed by their throat and tongue erupting in a torrent of blood. If there was any life left in the patient, that was swiftly ejected along with the contents of their bowels. It was such a horrendous fluid fest that during the siege of Athens, the Spartans turned and fled when they saw all the pyres of infected bodies. The Spartans are well known for their celebrations of violence and bloodshed, but they took one look at the plague-ridden citizens of Athens and said, "We'll come back when you guys are feeling better." It's estimated that anywhere between 1/3 and 2/3 of the city were wiped out over half a decade, before the plague up and vanished into the night. There's typhoid, which matches the reported symptoms, but it couldn't have caused a sudden apocalypse-level outbreak, because it was already killing people in ancient Greece. Another possibility that it was typhus, which acts quickly but doesn't cause the reported symptoms, and Ebola, which fits perfectly, except for the fact that this would mean, after devastating Athens, Ebola went underground for 2 millennia before resurfacing for its first official recording in Zaire in 1976. Glass delusion convinced people that they were made out of glass. It's pretty hard to imagine that anyone in the Middle Ages had any time for hobbies, what with the never-ending carnival of misery, plague, inquisitions, beheadings, and warfare. However, they found a way with glass delusion, a psychological disorder that became the fashion across Europe for everyone from royalty to the common law mud harvesters of the time. The condition was simple to diagnose. Sufferers were convinced that they were literally made of glass, and that any movement, no matter how slight, would shatter them into a million pieces. It also came and went in moods. In one moment, someone could be walking and talking and carrying perfectly fine, and the next be rendered unable to move from their bed for fear they might break. If you want to experience this for yourself, you can either drink to the point where you collapse on the floor and the slightest movement will make you scream the contents of your stomach into a perfectly vertical geyser, or you can simply pretend you have the disease until you really have it. Now you see, the weirdest thing about glass delusion, one of the first sufferers was King Charles VI of France in the 1400s. Although how or why he became consumed by the idea that he was nothing more than a blown up glass sculpture of a man, his affliction triggered a massive outbreak soon afterwards. And it's thought that this was the result of the population imitating his illness because of the celebrity culture. Unfortunately, the nature of the pathology being what it is, you can only pretend to act a certain way for so long until you actually are that way. So anyone copying the king's bizarre condition might have eventually found themselves afflicted with it for a long time. It was the 15th century after all. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, and I will catch you again next week. And I'd just like to say, thank you for everyone that's watching my videos and supporting me. Better wait now because my fucking sister's walking upstairs. I'm going to be walking in my room and going